Hello everyone, long time no see, and welcome back to a actual video on my channel. Now, I know my previous videos have been about not putting opinions on things, and I've kind of realised that, that's kind of difficult to do. So I will still try and give a balanced perspective on things, but issues which I'm going to be talking about today that bother me, I'm going to go, give you my opinion. You can take it or leave it. I will try and give a counter argument, but this was something that really peeved me off, if I'm perfectly honest, and I wanted to talk about it today. So what we have here is, what is gender pay gap at your company? Now, UK companies are currently submitting in pay figures as of Wednesday. Certain firms need to report in data on how much they pay men and women, and this is to disclose the gender pay gap. Now, the problem with this survey is the fact that they are not considering different jobs. So, for example, if we take a Dave who has let's say Dave who's a pilot at Ryanair, because apparently Ryanair is one of the biggest firms to have the biggest pay gap, and Dave is a pilot at Ryanair, and then you take Margaret, a woman who is a stewardess at Ryanair. Who do you think is going to get paid more? Now, if you're not a communist, you will say that yes, Dave's the pilot, so he's going to get paid more. Great, so he gets paid more. However, the problem with these figures is the fact that they're not taking these things into consideration. Now, had they gone and said, right, okay, I want all the firm's data on pay in each separate category of a job. So, for example, if there's, I don't know, Ryanair has 1,000 pilots, and I don't know how many pilots are women, but let's say, I don't know, 100 of them are women, okay, and they add up the mean average of how much the women pilots get paid to the male pilots, and there's a difference, then you might have something. You might be like, oh, okay, but then afterwards, you then got to take in consideration experience, who's been there longer. A lot of companies, when you're with someone for a long amount of time, you get a pay rise. So the problem with these figures is it's very skewed, and it's purposely done that, so it looks deliberately like that there's this pay gap. And time again, I see article after article after article on these different issues about how women are not paid enough, women are discriminated against. And I'm not saying that's not the truth. Maybe in some cases, women are discriminated against, but it's not as bad as people are trying to make it out to see. Okay, so what we have here is sectors that have a pay gap that favours men that the BBC have nicely provided for me. And as you can see at the top, you've got construction, finance and insurance, education, mining, communication, electricity and gas, so onwards. Those at the bottom are the ones that there isn't such a big gap, and the median pay gap is in the middle. So that's the normal difference between men and women in these sectors. Now, let's look at the very top one, construction. Now, how many female construction workers do you actually know? Now, I'm going to guess that there aren't going to be that many. And so, those women that are in the construction sector, I'm going to guess are probably people who are secretaries or on lower things. Now, I'm sorry if I'm stereotyping women. I'm not trying to. I'm just saying they're going to be women are less likely to be appealed towards a construction site. That doesn't mean all women, but it's just a sector. When you think of it, first thing that comes into your head, you're going to think a male construction worker. That doesn't mean you don't have female construction workers. There's probably really great ones out there, but it's a highly male-dominated field, construction work. And so the higher you are up in construction, it's actually quite a lot of pay. So if you have someone who's a secretary, which can be quite well paid, but it's not going to be the best paid area in the sector, you're going to get paid less than someone who's high up in construction. Now, we've also got mining. Again, don't think there's that many female miners out there. You've got electricity and gas. Now, in the recent years, I've seen a lot more women actually rising in that sort of sector, and that's probably why it's not as high up as it is, because there's more women who are actually going into that sector and not just at low positions of thing. But if we go towards the bottom and go towards, for example, household employers, health, now that could be the NHS, we could take that into consideration. Nurses, that's a highly female dominated area. and there are male nurses. I trained in health and social care myself, but that is a 90% plus industry that is dominated by women. But as you see, the pay gap there isn't that different, but it's also a less paid industry as well. Like if you look at, for example, retail, they were talking about how some companies had basically no pay gap at all. These included KFC, Matalan, Starbucks, Costa, McDonald's, Primark. Now, with these companies, they generally don't pay that well, at least in the lower positions. And so, great, good for them. But then they go and take places like Ryanair, where you have completely different pay gaps between people who are going to be doing a pilot again and the stewardess, or steward if there's a male. My point is, though, that of course lower companies, these companies don't really pay that well. KFC pay minimum wage. At least when I applied for there, they were basically going to pay me a minimum wage, and that's fine. KFC can pay the minimum wage if they want to. But my point is, it's not, they're making them out seem like, oh, look how virtuous they are. No, they're not virtuous. They're just trying to, make the most amount of money, so pay their stuff. These places are generally, okay, other than Costa, because Costa's a fortune for a coffee. But, KFC, Primark, these are cheap places, cheap food, cheap clothing. Nothing wrong with that. But, yeah, so of course there's not really much of a pay difference. But as we can see, like I said, at the bottom, household employers, there's basically no difference because, again, it's a low sector pay. Health, guarantee nurses, pay similar pay, which is actually surprised me because you do have doctors and there are more male doctors, but that's probably about a little difference in payers. So here we have a Vox article about the gender wage gap, and you're welcome to read it. I'll leave it in the description. And it's talking about how business school graduates, that men had slightly higher salaries right out of the gate when they graduate. As you can see, there is a difference of 115,000 for women average salary to 130,000 of men. However, if you go on 9 years later in business school, you see that there's a massive difference between men and women. You have women earning an average 250,000, while men's salaries average about 400,000. And what it takes into consideration, or fails to take into consideration, is that a lot of things happen between these 9 years. Now, believe it or not, men and women like to procreate. And what that means is, normally the women will have to go off and to have their child, or they may want to stay at home and look after the child. Of course, you have men looking after the child, but at either point, the women will have to go off at some point to have a birth, and quite a lot of the time, and I can take my own family into consideration, the women will end up wanting to stay at home because they want to bring up the child. In modern society, a lot of feminists like to think this is a horrible thing, and that women that want to stay at home and look after their children is an absolutely terrible, awful thing, even though it's perfectly natural. Doesn't mean fathers can't look after children, doesn't mean mothers have to look after children. It's just saying that people, one of them wants to stay at home and look after children. It's a new thing, it's a new responsibility. It's a good thing in a way that they want to take care of their child. That's my opinion. But point is, so let's take, I don't know, we'll say Gemma, and she's now gone off and had a child. Now, in that time, Greg, who was in the exact same position as her, has now got another year on her in experience, and now it comes to the big promotion. Are they going to hire the guy who has an extra year of experience for the job, or are they going to hire the woman who's gone off for a year? Now, most likely they're going to go hire the man. Now, is that fair? Maybe you could say it's unfair, but the point is, the company, again, want to go for profits, so they're going to hire they're more likely to hire the man for him to go into high positions. And this is where you start to get these big wage differences. So I'm using full factor Hall to actually provide some facts to back up my claims. And if you look at this, there we've provided average full-time and part-time pay chart, bar chart, really simple. And as you can see, men on full-time average pay is about £14.20 to women's £13, probably 20 or something like that. Again, now if you look at part-time, however, you can actually see that women actually earn more than men. And that's because more women are first off in part-time work because of childcare and looking after children, things like that. But actually, there is a pay gap between men, but there's no mention of the gender pay gap in part-time work. Oh no, we don't want to use that statistic. But as you can see, there is a clear difference between these two things, these two charts, and there is a gap between men and women, especially in the full-time one. It's a much bigger gap. But as I said earlier, this is because at this point, men are in full-time work. They're normally the breadwinners in careers, because the woman has gone off to have a child, or is only working part-time. And as you see, even part-time, they're women actually out-earning men. But yeah, so I just wanted to show you this. So here we have the Equal Pay Act of 1970. Now, this is the biggest problem when talking about the supposed pay gap, because the whole point of this act is so that men and women are employed on work terms and conditions of one sex and not in any respect less favourable than those of others. And for men and women employed on work rate related as equivalent, with the meaning of subsections below, the terms and conditions of one sex are not less favourable of those in any other respect in which terms and conditions of both are determined by the rating of their work. The following provisions of the section and section 2 below are framed of reference. I'm not going to read any more because that's just going to bore you guys. But the whole point of this, I will put it in the description for you, is the equal pay gap ensures that men and women get paid exactly the same, or they will get paid depending on their whatever their job title is. They shouldn't get discriminated against, or should have the same equal opportunities in the in that sort of in any career, basically. Because if the pay gap did exist, here's another argument. If I could pay women less, then if I was ever open a company, I'm going to hire just women, because I can make more profit. Because at the end of the day, the main goal of a company is to make profit. Of course, you could have you have charity organisations and things like that, but if I'm just running a company, the most important thing to me is profit. And if I can employ someone for less, then I'm going to employ that, because it means I make more money. So yes, there's the Equal Pay Act for you, and you're welcome to have a look at it. Now I'm going to go look up a alternative, and I will give a counterbalance to try and counter anything I've just said. And yeah. Now Huffington Post gives a nice counter argument to some of the statistics and things that I said earlier. Now a big thing at the moment is 79 cents for every dollar a man earns, a woman earns. In comparison, so what basically we're saying is a man earns $1 and the woman in comparison will earn 79 cents. And they're saying that it's an oversimplification, which is very fair, because a lot of people would like to spout that as the first statistic when trying to prove the gender pay gap. But earlier when I was talking about life choices, they said it is also an absurd oversimplification. So what they're saying is many women choose to stay home or cut back on their hours after having children, like I said. But many others don't opt out. They are forced out because they cannot afford childcare or find a full-time job that affords them any kind of flexibility. And culturally, Americans remain ambivalent about women working outside of the home. A little more than 30% of Americans still believe that women should stay home full-time to care for young children. Now, what he's saying here is a fair argument. Childcare and having children in general is a rather expensive thing. And so that's why these women like to cut down hours. It isn't just because they want to look after the children, it's because they have to. However, what I would say to that is, if that's the case, then don't have children. Simple as. You either have children and take on the responsibility, and that means they take priority in your life. It's no longer all about you, it's about your children. Or just don't have them and pursue a career. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to do that, great, go do that. And of course, you could say that men could also look after the children. And again, I'm all for that. For instance, I absolutely love children. If I could be a stay-at-home dad, I'd love to. But normally what happens is, if we go back to that previous example of the man earning more than the woman, you're going to have, normally the breadwinner is going to be the person that looks after, that is the one that's going to be the main breadwinner. You're asking the person that's going to stay in the job because they're earning more. And of course, you want more money so you can provide for the child and for yourself. And generally, because of so as you see, it's a big problem, and this is why the gender pay gap will never actually be fixed, because as long as until science progresses to a point where people grow their own test tube babies, people are always going to procreate and have children, and so you're always going to have someone at home. And there's also a lot of stigma around stay-at-home dads. If you say you're a stay-at-home dad, believe it or not, people won't really like that. They will have a go at you, and that's not right. And maybe you could break these stereotypes and these gender norms if you wanted to. But again, this is my opinion. So I'm really struggling, guys, to actually find statistics and facts on a counter argument here. So I'm sorry if I've left it's rather very short-ended, but I suppose this is more of an opinion video. If you've got any counter arguments, feel free to put in the description, and I'll happily argue them back, or I'll put them in another video. But yeah, so what I was going to end on was this. Now, I've worked in health and social care, like I said before, and that's a heavily female dominated area. And I've also worked at a few nurseries, and one of them I worked at was Montessori. I won't go into details in case of employers and things like that, but I'm not going to talk bad of it. It was a lovely place, and I worked there for a year. Now, I got paid, I believe, minimum wage at the time, which was £7.20. I actually started off at £5.50, but that's because I was younger. But then when it was my birthday, I increased, and in the UK it was £7.20 at the time. So it increased. And my qualification was health and social care. But because this was a Montessori one, some of my colleagues had Montessori qualifications level 2 and level 3. And some of the higher earning members of staff, they were earning £15 and £14, possibly higher after that year, but I know that they told me that's how much they were earning. Now, we were doing the exact same jobs. I was inexperienced, but we were doing the exact same jobs. But I was not annoyed at that, because at the end of the day, they had a different qualification to me. It was more relevant to the job, and although I was doing the exact same job as them, and doing the exact same things, I didn't have the same experience as them. I didn't have the same qualifications, so I'm not going to moan. So before you start thinking, oh, he's a male, he's privileged and blah, 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 well, there we go, I'm getting paid less than a woman. Am I moaning about it? No. What I could have done is I could have said, asked for a pay rise, and I didn't, because I was quite happy. It was a nice job, 9 to 3, but I could have asked for a pay rise. And this is another issue. A lot of men will actually ask for pay rises, whereas women tend to be, if you take a look at the big 5 personality trait, you'll see that women tend to be more agreeable, higher in agreeableness. And so they're less likely to go up to their employer and say, hey, I want a pay rise. And so if you don't ask, you're never going to get. And so if we take my life experience, I left that nursery and I went on to do counselling. I left because I was like, well, I could stay here and it's a lovely place, and it was. But I decided not to. I decided, no, I want to earn more. I want to actually get into a proper career path. So that's what I did. I left. And that's what people do. If you don't like something, if you're in a job and you think you're not getting paid the same, either ask for a pay rise, do something about it, improve your work ethic, or ask for a pay rise, or go somewhere else. Go get a qualification. If you're thinking about having children, but you also want to earn a lot of money, then you may need to think, okay, well, and this is for women, if that's the case, then is your husband maybe willing to stay at home? Or do you really want kids? What's more important? Do you want children, or do you want to have your career? I know there's some people that can have both, and good for them, but you've got to be realistic, and it's very irresponsible that people don't go on about about these life decisions, because in schools they just talk about education, and I'm going on a rant here, I know. But my point is, if that is the case, then you really need to think about your future. So young women, if any of young women are actually listening to this video, you need to think about your future. Do you want to have a career, or do you want to have kids? And whatever it is, it's your choice, your thing. But you need to think about these things, because otherwise you end up becoming really bitter, thinking, oh no, men are earning more than me, and it just isn't true. These facts are just not true, they're false, and they constantly put out these arguments, which is why I did this video, because I was really peeved off, because it's not true. It's not. If you want to live in a fair democratic society, then which has equal opportunity, then you need to accept the consequences of actions and things. So if you want to have a child and take off work, great, do that. If not, don't complain. So anyway, this was the Healing Divide. Thanks for listening, for anyone who actually watches this, and like and subscribe.